Mama hasn't made this, hasn't made this, hasn't made this,
My name is Adinaka Isabella. This is Nigerian speaking. Welcome. If you're listening to this episode, you might be wondering about the process of buying a home in Nigeria and what it takes. Or perhaps you already own a home and went through a tedious buying process. But for many, buying a home is completely unaffordable. Amidst all this, you might be wondering what the government has done to address this crisis. And that's the subject of my discussion today. I'm thrilled to have Tobi Fatimilehin, the former head of the investment team at Family Homes Fund. Family Homes Fund is a social housing initiative in Nigeria established to address the country's significant housing deficit by providing affordable housing options. It is a partnership between the Federal Ministry of Finance and the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. Join me as we unpack and explore the efforts being made to tackle the housing crisis in Nigeria. For starters, we're going to talk to you today about affordable housing in Nigeria, and I'd like to start by asking you how you got into working in affordable housing in Nigeria.
So, disclaimer, I currently do not work in affordable housing in Nigeria. I used to, but how did I start in affordable housing? So, after university, I moved back to Nigeria and I started working in consulting, primarily corporate finance consulting. During that period, I had a few real estate transactions that I was lead on. We had to raise capital for a developer, raised about $20 million from that developer, and sold one of the businesses he owned. So we did consulting for about 4-5 years and then moved into investment banking. And same way in investment banking, I kept finding myself on real estate transactions. So naturally, you've done this. And I moved to an organization called Rendeavor. Rendeavor was trying to build an industrial city in the Lekki Free Trade Zone. I felt that was an exciting way to execute some of the things I had learned during consulting and banking. And then when I had the opportunity came to move to Abuja and work for someone I respect. And he was heading what was then, or what is called the Family Homes Funds. The Family Homes Funds had a mandate to deliver 500,000 units in 5 years. I was, employed to head the investment team deploying those funds that were given to them by the government for the building of affordable housing units. So that's how I found myself in affordable housing. Yeah, so my time there, worked there for 2 years. We financed about 13,000 units across 9 states in Nigeria. Yeah, so that was my experience in affordable housing.
This all seems like a very impressive career, but yes, before we delve into affordable housing, I'd like you to start by telling us what affordable housing is and how big of a problem it is, because we've seen different statistics quoted in different places by different organizations. For example, in the Punch newspaper in 2023, we were told that Nigeria had a housing deficit of 7 million and it has risen to 12 million as of 2007. As of the latest in 2023, it was 28 million. So tell us what affordable housing is and how big of a problem it is.
Affordable housing is one of those things that everybody defines it in every different way. I think the simplest way to define it is housing that is affordable. I know that probably doesn't make sense, but one of the best definitions I have is housing for households and individuals who at or below the median income as agreed on by the government in that area. So for instance, I think the median income in Nigeria is about 340,000. So that's the income at the middle. So it's market. So we're saying that people that will need affordable housing in Nigeria are those who are earning 40,000 and below. Now, I know there has been an adjustment in the minimum wage. I think it's risen from 30 to 70, I believe. And I'm aware that the implementation was supposed to be 1st of May. I don't know whether that will take that, but using figures before then, I believe median was 340,000 monthly. So anybody that earns 340,000 and below would be a candidate for affordable housing. I think also affordable housing can be drilled down further into, what is called social, what is called affordable. So your social housing is more of, it's mostly rental. So people are renting in affordable housing as opposed to buying or looking to acquire. It's mostly driven by government and non-profits, and it's based on the need. So it's people that are in sort of dire need at that point, right? That is social housing, a very, very defined criteria that the government or the local authority would use to determine those who require social housing. Social housing is developer-led, right? So it's private sector-led. The developer may receive subsidies from government or find ways to subsidize, and it's targeted at people with lower income, right? So probably people that are earning. So maybe in social, the individual may not be earning, but in affordable, individual earns. And typically, I know there's no broad definition in Nigeria, but in the UK, affordable units are sold or rented at about 20% at least. No prevailing market value in that area. So that is it. It's sort of affordable housing, sort of this umbrella term that everybody uses, ranging from social housing to affordable housing. So things like shared ownership, buy to rent will fall under your affordable housing definition. And you had another question, which was how important is it?
Yeah, how big of a problem is it?
So putting it into context, I think Nigeria's labor force, especially Nigeria, is about 75 million people, right? And we're looking at the median income being 340. So imagine for, about half of these people, fall on the lower side of that median income. That's about 37.5 million people that, are in need of some sort of affordable housing or some sort of subsidy for their house. 37.5 million people. That's just the workforce, not the total population and their families. We're looking at that 37.5 million people. That will be the 39th largest country in the world. So that's a bigger population than Morocco. So it is instantly important. Affordable housing is a basic human need, right? For stability, even for prosperity. So having housing that is affordable increases individuals' disposable income. Now, by convention, you're not supposed to spend more than a third of your income on housing. So if housing is not affordable and spending more than a third, it reduces how much you can spend on, other things you need on healthcare and other things. So it's important, for adequate disposable income. Also, get security and stability, and will stimulate economic growth. It's as important as having housing. So that's what's important.
Okay, so you've given us kind of an overview of the affordable housing situation. I'd like us to go into the main challenges facing development of affordable housing in Nigeria. What are the barriers in your previous job? What are the challenges you faced to delivering this 500,000 units in 5 years? So what were some of the problems you faced during that?
So I think, I'm not sure, if this is not in any order, but I think the largest and the most difficult one to overcome we've seen is, purchasing power. Nigerians are not, the wealthiest. But we know most Nigerians, it's a statistic that, how many Nigerians, Nigerians live on $2 a day. We all know those figures. I think that's one of the biggest problems. I have done a few calculations. I just need to pull that up and just give you some numbers to see what these things look like. With a minimum wage of 70,000 naira a year, and I'll give two scenarios where we go to a commercial mortgage bank, or what's the Nigeria we call your primary mortgage bank, PMBs, and your federal mortgage bank. So the major difference between the two is that your federal mortgage bank will give you a longer tenure, depending on the years you have to retirement, and it gives you a rate of 6%. Your commercial mortgage bank, you're looking at low to mid-20s or even high 20s as the interest rate, and you're looking at tenures of between 7 and 10 years. Those make very, very big differences in what you would achieve in terms of what you can buy. So if someone earns 70,000 naira a month, and for instance, this is post-tax, so tax has been taken out, net of tax is 70,000. What you can spend on your mortgage from that is about 23,000 naira monthly, a third of it. So you can spend about 280,000 naira annually to pay a mortgage. Now, the loan amount you would get based on that income level is about just under 1 million naira, right? Now, if we say that you have a loan to value ratio of 70%, that means on a 70,000 naira income, you can really afford a house that is worth 1.4 million naira.
Okay, so for my listeners that are not finance people, what's loan to value ratio?
Loan to value ratio is, I was trying not to be too technical, but okay. Loan to value ratio is basically the value of the property. So you want to buy a house, it's 100 million naira. That's the value of the house. Now, your mortgage bank will typically give you a percentage of that value, which is a loan to value. Typically, most mortgages will do, the highest will be a 70% loan to value. So that means if your house is 100 million, the mortgage bank will give you 70 million naira as a loan, and you will be expected to put a deposit of 30 million naira. So that is simply what it is. So in this case, where the individual can only afford a house of 1.4 million naira, he's still expected to bring a loan of equity contribution, of 400,000 naira to that equation. Now, if we look at going to the Federal Mortgage Bank at 6% and a 25-year tenure, which means you are doing this very early in your career as a civil servant or whatever, you have 25 years to retirement, the loan amount that can be derived based on that income of 70,000 is about 3.6 million naira, and the value of the house that can be purchased based on a 70% loan to value ratio is about 5.1 million naira. I doubt you can build any decent house in Nigeria today with 5.1 million naira. So you can see how things start to shape up. Now, if we use the median salary, I know I'm using a lot of numbers, I'm using those two same criteria. So your commercial loan with 5% for 10 years and your federal mortgage bank loan at 6% for 25 years. So at 340,000 naira, going to a commercial bank, you probably can only afford a house that is about 7 million naira. So the bank will only give you a loan of about 4.8 million naira. But if you went to the federal mortgage bank, completely different stream, you can afford a house that is 25 million naira, with the bank giving you a mortgage of about 17 million naira. So one of the key things is the fact that finance is difficult. So one, we're a poor country. Access to finance is very, very bad. I believe that according to the Federal Mortgage Bank, they've only disbursed about, since inception, I think, such total number of loans, active mortgage loans in Nigeria, less than 25,000.
Wow.
So for a country of 200 million people, mortgage loans, so this is PMBs, so that's your private mortgage funds and your federal mortgage funds.
Really a commercial.
Comes up to less than 25,000. So it's about 500 and something thousand loans. That access to finance isn't there. Right? So that's the point number two. So first one is purchasing power is very low. Access to finance is bad. Two, there is this housing gap. Right? So numbers range from 17 to 28. I mean, whatever number it is very high. And I think we haven't even done enough to properly segment what are the needs for that market, where are these things needed. So I don't think enough work has been done there to properly segment and see what is actually needed. I think I have a number of about 60 trillion naira is needed to close that gap. You can just see the magnitude of what we're talking about. Another thing is land ownership. I think one of the most difficult things facing many people is the fact that titles, the Land Use Act, a big challenge to securing financing.
So what is the Land Use Act? How does it impact affordable housing? So
the Land Use Act, it was enacted in sometime in the 70s. I'm not sure if it's 78. I'm not sure exactly when. Yeah, sometime after independence. And I think it was to transition from the system, majorly the pre-colonial system, to what was more a Nigerian type of system. So pre-colonial system, you had the customary sort of land ownership. You had a non-customary that was based on land owned by the British Crown, which was more prevalent in like the Lagos colony. And you had a special dispensation in the north, where the Governor General land was vested in the power of the Governor General. So I think land use act sort of transferred land in Nigerian states to the person of the governor. So your governor is responsible for issuing titles in urban areas. So all urban land is vested in the governor, while all rural land is vested in the local government chairman. But there's some deference to the governor in certain areas. But ultimately, the governor of each state, all land is vested in his hands, or her hands, as it were. One of the challenges for me is the fact that titling has not been properly, I don't use the word properly, done, but there have been issues with, effecting titling, especially in many states. For instance, Lagos just launched its geographic information systems this year. So that means digitizing the land records.
The parcels,
Yeah. So obviously, I don't know if it's been fully digitized, but, trying to get what title is what, who owns that. So that's why we have many issues with land, as it were. And that doesn't give any investor or any financier confidence either land. So you may be sitting on land worth millions, but it's hard to use, especially in certain areas. In certain areas, it's easier to leverage, that asset you have and borrow to do things and expand your business. Lots of things you would like to do. So that's one of the challenges in terms of having the Land Use Act. I think another thing is, one of the things that I think, and I'm sure a lot of news today points to that, is the fact that so much power is vested in the governor, right? And I'll give you an example. So the best way to explain this is, so in my job at Family Homes Funds, a lot of what we did was try to work with states, because to build, sizable developments, you need sizable amount of land. To make it affordable, you need to try and get the land as cheaply as possible. You almost certainly have to work with the governors in those states who can give you the land free, who can remove processing fees, who can remove things like ground rent you have to pay. And I'm not going to obviously mention the name of the governor, but we had a meeting with this governor, and he gave us a big parcel of land, the demarcations. And I said, if it's not enough, that there's one land there that you invoke, the certificate of occupancy for that adjoining land and give it to us. And I don't know if he was trying to impress us, but I was very, very worried, because my thought was, okay, so today, your governor, I get the land. Tomorrow, the next governor, it's 4 years, it's 8 years. Next governor comes and she's my body and says, okay, and revokes the land. There's this thing that the governor acts in public good and revoke titles whenever necessary. Now, I don't know if that public good is properly defined. What is public good? And I think events we're having today sort of show, I'm not going to mention those events, or show the what is public good versus. So I think those are the challenges. It makes investment in housing generally difficult for foreign investors, even for local investors. So those impact affordability. And processing titles, right, which is sort of linked to the Land Use Act, it's expensive. It can cost up to 10% of land in Lagos, I believe, and then it costs up to 12% of the value of land. And imagine big plots of land you need for development of affordable housing. What happens is you're starting to add costs even before you put the block on, or you dig the foundation. You're adding costs, and for a developer to do something and make profit out of it, then it starts to pile up. those are some of the big issues. And I think also certain times take a long while, loads of procedures to get titles. It's something that needs review, and I believe, I believe that there are plans to work with the National Assembly. This current administration has plans to work with the National Assembly to revise and review it. So hopefully we can see some good changes, and I hope in doing so they consult across a wide spectrum. All parties, so financiers, developers, owners, can come up with solutions. Yeah.
Okay, I do have one more question about the barriers, but I wanted to ask you quickly, what is zoning, and does this play a role in providing affordable housing to
So,
people?
so what do you mean by zoning, Victoria?
Zoning laws, like where you can build versus non-build. How do you
Okay.
think about this in affordable housing, and does that play a role?
Okay. Oh, yes, it does. So, and I think, okay, so when places are zoned certain things, you get concepts like 15-minute cities where you want to be close to where you live, where you work, where you school, where you access healthcare, where you access lifestyle, as close as possible and not as close to those as possible. I think obviously zoning affects it because you also want to be where infrastructure is, where work is, where schools are, and other things you do in your life. So many people, and what you tend to find, especially in Nigeria, and even when I was at family homes once, is we tend to push the areas zoned for affordable housing away from infrastructure. You don't improve the quality of lives of people that, are in need of these houses. I'll give you an example. We had a project in Nassau State. This was on the border between, just on the outskirts of Abuja, Nassau, just on the outskirts in Massacre. And it's one of those places where in a few years you'll probably feel in charge. And we managed to, deliver units, one bed at about, 3 million naira, and 2 bed at about 4 million naira. But due to that place, from the main highway, the road was off. From our central Abuja to when you turn off to the place was probably 30 minutes when there's no traffic. But from the highway to the side, it was another 30 minutes when it could have been a 15-minute journey because of the bad road. You can't have that. So one important thing is having those units in zones where there's already infrastructure, but when there's already infrastructure, those costs of that land is higher. So we tend to move it into where there isn't any good infrastructure because it's sort of cheaper land. It's also trying to find a balance between having infrastructure to those areas and actually even bringing those developments closer into town, because what you are saving, you don't want what you are saving in your rent or your mortgage payments to be eaten up by transport costs. So those are some key considerations.
Yeah, and my final questions about the barriers are, so all that you've said has centered around urban dwellers, and I was wondering how much of projects or programs are targeted at rural areas. There seems to be like a rural-urban divide in solving the issue of affordable housing. So, yeah.
To be fair, imagine the difficulty in an urban area where title may be even properly better registered than in a rural area. There is better infrastructure. There are so many things. So it tends to be focused on the urban areas because, look, we have a rapidly urbanizing growth rates, right? So most, and I would say this, most initiatives that I'm aware of tend to focus on the urban areas. It's very hard to see rural areas undergoing that sort of, I think at times there have been little, not little, but there have been audacious projects in what would have been relatively rural areas. So what comes to mind is Festa. I believe the government built about 11,000 housing units in that area. I'm not sure what it was prior to 70, I believe it was 76, 77, before the arts festival. But there are things that, there are things that drive that, but I'm not seeing enough of those, sort of, what would I call it, events to drive those growth in, a remote area. So
Right.
another good one, I think, would be the Games Village in Jai, after I was in the Commonwealth Games. So you have those, one-off events where things happen and, goes to, what's put in really rural area. But, it always still happens in, in your Lagos or your Abuja, in an area that will probably urbanize anyway at some point as it grows and people move out from the center.
Now that you mentioned it, like, I do have a question about, like, for the two examples you gave, the Games Village and then the Festac, the Arts and Culture Village that was built. So I know, like, typically when these big events or anchor events are coming to, like, an area, like, there's much to be made about the impact on the immediate environment, and much has been made about how Festac or houses were sold or who now occupies those houses. So is this like a strategy that governments employ when they're constructing these things in the first place? Or is that just like an afterthought?
Okay, so I think, obviously I wasn't born in the 70s. With a first stack, I can't really see what, the end goal of the government was building those units. But I think more and more, even with your renewed hope, so there's this new policy called the Renew Hope Cities that this current administration is planning to roll out. I'm not sure if they started rolling those out yet, but there's a plan for that. And even
Renew Hope Cities. Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's what they're called. I believe it's spearheaded by the Ministry of Works and Housing,
Okay.
and I think the plan is 1 million units. So you have all these audacious plans. So,
Over
like
what period of time?
I believe it's the lifetime of the administration. I'm not sure if
Okay.
it's 4 or 8 years. I believe it's 1 million. You have this audacious plan. So Family Home Funds was 500,000 in 5 years. So that's 100,000 a year. Even coming back to it, one of the barriers is, I forgot to mention, is your cost of construction. So in the last, Nigeria is a high inflationary environment. In the last 3 years, I believe, I remember in probably 2001, cement was a 50 kg bag of cement was about, I think now it's selling between 7,000 and 8,000. So it's getting more expensive to build. Back to, the government's priority and what they look at. I think more and more the government realizes that people cannot afford, need some sort of help. So they're looking at that affordable range because I believe they feel that your middle class and middle income probably do not need as much help, which I do believe that they do. But that's another question. But they feel so the focus tends to be lower income. But now what you find is on the demand side. So we're talking about supply side issues, I believe. On the demand side, and what affects supply also affects demand in this affordable housing thing. On the demand side, now we've just gone through the numbers where someone earning 70K can, afford a house that is 5 million. I went on the Federal Housing Authority's website, and I think the cheapest house they had was 5.5 million. So it pricing a lot of people out, ranging from 5.5 million to about 37 million. So a lot of people are being priced out of actually affording houses. What you find is even with these schemes where they are meant to be affordable, the people that need them still can't afford them. And you have sort of landlords and high net worth individuals buying these units and renting it out. So if you build a 10 I sell it. We've had instances where one individual comes and he buys 10 of the units. Obviously, he's buying 10 units to rent out, and it defeats the purpose of actually building affordable housing. On the supply side, there are challenges. On the demand side, there are big challenges because of low incomes as well, cost of construction. They can't access finance. They can't access finance because titles are not in the best shape and all of that.
Perfect. So let's speak about like initiatives and programs and tools that would help this huge problem as we've been talking about. Are there any specific initiatives or programs that governments have it brought, or even the markets has made it possible to allow us to have affordable housing in Nigeria?
The government does try. I think the Nigerian government, and look, they're politicians are politicians everywhere. Politicians like to see things that they can feel and touch. It's easier to, cut the ribbon on a 100,000 unit estate as opposed to deeply working on the mortgage system to support demand. It's like 80,000 houses. I promised you I was going to build 1,000 houses. Here are 1,000 houses. So I think a lot of focus has been on the supply side, right, without really tackling it from both ends. And I think that there needs to be work on the whole value chain. So from construction, right? So in terms of construction and supply, all the things that affect it, land, finance, construction materials need to be addressed. And on the demand side, access to finance also needs to be addressed. So I think why some of these schemes have not been as good as they could be is the focus on just supply side financing. Family home funds is a very good example, good initiative, but we focused a lot on the supply. I'll give you an example. So I said that in Nasarawa State, we had managed to deliver a one-bed unit at about 2 million and a 2-bedroom for 3 million. And yes, people wanted it, but we found that even after completing this project, a year and a half after, a almost 600 unit estate, probably only about 50 people were living in it. So we had to come up with schemes as pay contributions towards getting in, pay contributions towards a mortgage, even though you don't have a mortgage yet. So people find it difficult to make that equity contribution. People find it difficult to make that contribution, and that's a big thing. So, directly mortgage banks will give you 100% loan to value, so give you the whole value of the house as a mortgage. So you have to contribute 30% yourself, right? So saving towards that is also hard for people. So that's a key thing that I feel has been one of the biggest flaws. And I think also then in the middle is tackling the cost of construction. So a few things that reported in a high inflationary environment. Is there a way governments can also not even just subsidize, invest in manufacturers to ensure that things come cheaper for those types of development? So those are some of the things that I think can be considered, but it's always focused on one end because it just makes a lot of sense to deliver 1,000 units and forget about who's going to live there after we deliver 1,000 units. So I think that's the biggest issue with housing delivery initiatives in Nigeria.
Okay, it sounds like you're talking about ownership, affordable housing units for people who want ownership. What's being done about the rent market?
So I think we have a culture of wanting to own in Nigeria, and so everybody wants to own their home, and that is what informs what the government does. I know they've tried a few, even at when I was at Family Home Funds, we tried rental schemes, the working and rental schemes, but predominantly focused on ownership because there is a big ownership culture in the country. I don't think a lot of initiatives have really driven towards a rental type solution.
Okay, so from your perspective, because we've talked a lot about financing, like this conversation has been a parallel conversation about financing, both from the point of view of the developers and for demand as well, or the buyers or the consumers. Talk to us about like the barriers to financing and what exactly, you even mentioned double-digit interest rates. How does that impact how this problem is in Nigeria?
Okay, so one, I said we're in a high inflationary environment, right? So I believe inflation is pushing 30, hasn't crossed 30 yet, meaning everything is more expensive. So that is even just a cost, right? So planning, I know many developers today One of the ways Nigerians fund development is your pre-sales. So a developer wants to build, maybe he's building 30 units. He probably does an advance sale of about 10 other units. Those paying that funds the construction, and he supplements with his own money and maybe borrowing from the bank, so that there's a good mix, because that is almost interest-free. Maybe not interest-free, but it's more percentage of cost, because you're probably selling cheaper than you would as you completed. So it's now hard for them to plan, right? So I know some developers that, had their prices at a certain amount, but as prices kept and the cost kept going up, they had to stop the pre-sales because, you don't want to make a terrible loss on that. So it makes, planning, just even planning, very, very difficult. Security on the land. So if your title is not in perfect order, no bank is going to give you, any kind of financing, because what is the protection for them? It's, that security of that, of that assets that you have. So if that asset is not really secure, then nobody is going to give you that financing. I think another thing is tenure of capital. Banks don't really do long-term borrowing. They don't lend on a long-term basis. Nigerian banks lend on a very, very short-term basis. That also has a significant impact in the cost of financing. Imagine having to pay high interest rates, within a short amount of time. Many mortgages, in the Western world are longer, at a cheaper interest rates. So, these days, for a very long time, I think we had, 2-3% interest rates on in the West. It's up until recently that, those rates are started to inch up as, base rates have gone up. But you have that high cost because of the risk profile of the country and the short tenor, which just, makes it, extremely prohibitive to borrow to buy a house. And I'll give you an example. So when I was in one of the mortgage transactions I had worked on, the MD of the mortgage bank said she would never lend to anybody that wants to buy a house above 100 million. Because by the time we did the math and you saw how much you probably had to pay 150%, look, how many people in Nigeria can actually afford to pay this amount? Because, I think it came up to, I can't remember the amount, but it was about 20 something million per annum. So meaning that you had to earn 66 million, I think it was 22 or 23 million. So you had to earn about 66 million because it's a third you're allowed to spend on your mortgage per annum. I think another thing is that is not also spoken at great length is the fact that we have a high population in the informal sector. We have a high population of self-employed people that work for themselves and do things for themselves. And because our mortgage market is not even that developed yet, it's still based on your income, and where it's kind of difficult to now even support people in that informal sector who don't have a steady amount that come in. So we haven't found ways to obviously work with those individuals who make a big part of the labor workforce and the population of the country. So I think those are some of those barriers to what makes how the cost of financing a bit prohibitive.
Okay, so now we've heard all the problems: financing, demand, supply. I'll get back to you on sustainability because that's also important. But I'd like to find out, from your perspective, what are the key factors that stakeholders will want to provide solutions, or what are some of the things that are making you happy in this sector?
Okay. I'm not sure. I don't want to sound very pessimistic, but not a lot of things making me happy. I think we're still going down the route of focusing mainly on supply and not having a holistic approach to tackling the problems. But I would say, I think there's about 2 policy discussions or that I think will help in one way or the other. So revising that Land Use Act, I think, is a big one. I think a few more states adopting and trying to get to grips with the whole geographic information system. So I think Kaduna is doing, I believe Oyo is also doing. I think Lagos is done. I think I know Abuja has one.
Okay, so for the benefit of those that are not familiar with graphic information system, GIS mapping, please explain.
So it's just mapping, the plots in within your states, having, transactions seamlessly placed on those. So two people don't say this is my land, that is your land. So it's making, having all those issues sorted out. So, the first thing is have, those your plots, data on those plots uploaded. So you can also make you going to check, do a search a lot easier than having to go through lawyers and all of these things. So those are some of the things that would help when you want to acquire a piece of land. We are talking to all those things would make things faster and more efficient.
Can you also talk about the role that this plays in taxing and
Exactly.
figuring out
Thank you very
assessed
much.
value? Yeah.
So it also helps the states to also increase their IGR, so that's their internally generated revenue, because who owns the land, you can actually effectively get your ground rents, land use charges, and all of these things. So, and also, if the person wants to make a sale and it probably hasn't met all of those obligations, you need certain things to be able to do that. So you can also ensure that you always collect on those. So I think it's very important, and I'm happy. I think I read somewhere I can't remember when, that there's about $2 million funding to states to into every state so that they implement the system. I don't know how far they've gone.
And do you know where that is coming from?
I'm not sure. I believe it's either the World Bank.
Okay.
I would need to double check that, but yes, I know states were supposed to get to $2 million grants to build the systems. I mean, if it costs a lot more budgets, it would help. And on the last bit of ray of sunshine and hope, policy wise, is the NMRC, so the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company. We can talk about that a bit later, and the advantages and disadvantages of having that. They have developed a mortgage foreclosure framework. It's meant to boost confidence for investors, because if it's hard to foreclose on property that is in default, I'm not going to put my money there. There are certain things, it has to be almost seamless for you to be able to when the property has been in default, to take possession and be able to either sell and return money to investors. So that should also give investors confidence. I know a few states have signed up. I'm not sure about how many, but a few states have signed up, and I believe they're pushing that. So I think those will make it better.
Okay, I'd like us to focus now on sustainability. This is a topic that is very dear to my heart. We know that I know we pretend like it's not happening in Nigeria, but climate change is happening. How we think of our built environment is happening. We have to change the way we do things. So can you talk to me about innovative technologies or innovative systems that people in affordable housing are thinking about in order to build houses efficiently, as well as support the development of communities while doing this? Or is this something that we can't be thinking about right now?
Okay, so in obviously my affordable housing experience, was family home funds, and I spoke to a lot of developers that were trying out different technologies, one to make it faster, two to make it to reduce the amount of waste you have on sites, and things like that. Now, the biggest issue with things like technology is the heat scale. Currently, I think it's said that we produce about 800. We had the addition to the housing stock is about 100,000 units per annum. So, and that's across 36 states. So if we divide it evenly, that's what, about 2,000. Let's take 2,000, 2,500 per state. I don't think it's enough, to make it worthwhile for many of these technologies to be deployed. sustainability has not really been a priority in terms of building in Nigeria at the moment. Yes, people come with ideas, trying to build developments that, have free areas, have spaces for recreation, places where, people can go for walks, or that. So, even that, a few developments you see now are taking that very, very seriously. So, green spaces, recreation, then, some sort of commercial to support the residential, so having stores, in local stores, so that you don't have to drive far to get to things, even pharmacies within some of the development, you don't have to drive far. I think that is a form of sustainability in itself. Also, in terms of sustainability and ensuring things work, I think in many areas, certainly Lagos and Abuja, people becoming more comfortable with paying service charge, getting more comfortable with paying for those amenities that make their lives better. But honestly, those sort of work in areas where people are comfortable. When you're not comfortable and you're almost living later to paycheck, it becomes a bit more difficult to think about those things. So I know a family home fund, one of the things we required was have green spaces. People came with developments where there were schools, just having mixed communities where it's, and we always ensured that there was a plan to sustain the environment we built. So I'm sure you're very aware of even 1004. I remember when I was young in primary school, I used to go for Mr. Johnson's lesson, and I think he lived on the 6th floor. Yeah, and you had to walk up a couple of flights of stairs because no maintenance, no service charges connected. And the development just went until I think it was sold to DC is a redevelopment. So it's very important. But I think it's in very specific areas that those things happen. So I guess as incomes become more, then it's easier to have sustainability in that way. On the flip side, on your more eco-friendly time building technologies and the likes, not very, very popular and not very, very prevalent. I'll give you an example. So on one of our developments in Ogun State, we tried to use molds and point concrete into the molds, and we found that we had to stop and do traditional builds because it was just difficult for the workforce to adopt that really. It slowed it down. So technology is good, but I think we are a bit away. We need to be building more numbers, 1 million a year, for me to, most people to consider that investment.
All right. So can you share success stories or case studies in Nigeria or other developing countries or even like other middle income countries or high income countries that we can learn from in our affordable housing journey?
So in Nigeria, I'm not sure that I know. Maybe the way I should say is, my view of what a successful affordable housing project would look like. I think a successful affordable housing project, right, needs what you would call some sort of cross-sourcing, right? So you also don't want slums. So when you put people that are, low income in one area, you tend to see a slum. So just think about, when you're driving past Ulster Barracks and the police barracks by Farnham Bridge and all of that, you see what those turn to. I think it's very important that there is a form of cross-subsidy. In the United Kingdom, that has, been somewhat effective. I think. So
you mean like mixed income housing?
So, for instance, in the United Kingdom, if you're building anything above 10 units, you have to make a contribution towards affordable housing, either building or paying some sort of amount towards affordable housing. Most developers find a way to build below 10, below 9, but there are times when, you need to build a lot to actually make some profits. When I'm not sure the percentage exactly, but a percentage needs to go towards affordable housing. I think that is the way to go. So you have the middle, and you can have very high end, you can have middle income, and you can have low income in the same space. where those subsidies run across. And that way, the private developer can make good profits from the development he's building. I think that's the ideal. It's mixed income with subsidies, and even with the service charges, you can also have subsidies across, and that cross subsidy across everything that needs to be done in land development.
Okay, and I don't know why I didn't ask you earlier, but we've talked a lot about subsidies. What are the forms of government subsidies that can help developers go into this? I can think of tax credits, but what other subsidies are there to be able to do this?
So yeah, you're right. So that the tax credits thing are probably the easiest one for them to do. And I think they can. I mean, one was family home fund. So there was an idea of a national social housing project, so away from the affordable to the social, and it was almost actually investing in the manufacturers. So government giving money to the manufacturers and saying cement is, at that point it was about 4. With this investment, I want to sell to the developer at 3.5 to the screen developers. So that's another way to do that. Now, Nigeria is probably more difficult because cash is a bit hard to come by these days. So it's hard. I think another subsidy is in the finance. In family home funds, providing financing at 10% to developers, significantly lower than the 20-25% you get. Obviously, is that the most sustainable way to do it? Probably not, because obviously, the real value of what you're getting because of inflation is sort of lower. But that's another way, the government can do that. They can do the subsidy on the demand side, such as the Federal Mortgage Bank, which gives rates at 6%. But also, the problem with that is it almost has to be funded, by contributions and by members and the government, because nobody is going to put money, in the 6% return vehicle, right? So those are some ways I think the government can subsidize the space. I think I believe the most profitable one is actual investment in the manufacturing, because that will grow the economy, that will, inject, capital, employ people. So I believe if there was a route, if, you could only pick one, I think all 4 should be considered. But if you could only pick one, I think that should be the one. And also a demand support. So those 3, would be very, very important.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, my last question. Based on your experience, what advice do you have for someone who wants to go into affordable housing, a career in affordable housing, whether that's as a developer, as a consultant? What do they need to know? And what are the expected things?
So maybe we should take a step back to talk about who are the players, right?
Okay.
So because there's a big value chain, right? So you can work in one of the primary mortgage banks supporting buyers. You can work in the Federal Mortgage Bank, sort of a regulator type figure. You can be a developer. You can be in construction, development and construction, kind of 2 different things, but we always lump them together. You can work in construction, you can work in development, you can work in the manufacturing of materials needed for this. So, I mean, depending on what you do, from engineering to architecture, urban development and planning. Think about it. If you're building 1,000 units housing estates, think about the infrastructure that needs to go into that. You need to consider roads, in and out of that development you're doing, because everybody has to get to work at 8 a.m. You can't have a tiny road, for 1,000 unit development. I know we had one of those schemes, and someone brought one of those schemes to us, and there was a tiny road in that of the development, and we said, look, at 8 o'clock in the morning, how does everybody get out? Nigerians have cars. Think about, how do you do parking in those places? There are various opportunities. There are urban planners, there are architects, there's engineers. If you're building up, how much planning you have to do, mechanical, electrical, well, there's the finance bit. So, okay, you know, a mortgage broker, a mortgage lender. I know there's also the policy bits as well of it. So I think, you know, it's wide ranging. Anybody and everybody can work in that. I think what we probably need in Nigeria, I think the most important thing is curiosity and looking for solutions. Because look, I know we've spoken about the government a lot in this, just because of the difficulty. And there's a way also, I think, we can start with little, let not say little help, but minimal help from the government. And I think a way to do that is starting from the middle, because high income, sorted, starting from the middle, because they need some help, and working your way down to the bottom. I think we have a case of trying to start from the bottom and working your way up, which I think makes things not, always successful. I think starting from the middle, then always just a little help, shaking your way down. But it's finding creative solutions to the problems that we currently have. And I think that is the biggest thing that is needed in this space.
All right, thank you. Can you leave us with a book that you're reading now and tell us what are you reading now?
So the book I'm reading now has nothing to do with housing or finance or anything. So my favorite genre of books is historical fiction. So I'm currently reading a book called Pachinko. It's about, I just started that. It's set in the early 20th century, Japan just colonizing Korea, and looking at the lives of a certain family that ran a boarding house in Korea, and their relationships. So very interesting. So that is what I'm currently reading.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Happy to have a follow-up discussion anytime.
Yes, yes. There's so much to follow up on, and come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much.